I think the first thing I probably said was like, how do you edit animation? Isn't it already done?
Welcome to episode 2 of Panels and Pacing, an animation editing podcast. This is our first real episode with a real guest, and we'll be featuring Luke Guidici, writer, director, and editor, who's recently worked on Invincible, has credits such as Hot Wheels City, Curious George, and most notably for this particular episode, HarmonQuest. Also joining us today is Will Torbett, an editor who's worked on Adventure Time, Fionna Cake, and some other animation shows, and will be our guest interviewer for today once we get to the HarmonQuest portion. Welcome, everybody.
Howdy.
Hello.
So Luke and I worked together on HarmonQuest about 10 years ago, and I'm happy to have him as my first guest here. I consider him kind of a mentor in the animation world. So he was kind of the second editor that I worked under, and learned a lot. And he's very kind of like calm and patient demeanor to him, and as an editor, or at least as a editor. A mentor to an assistant editor. I can't speak to how common demeanor is in sessions, but I think still pretty good. But yeah, so today we'll be talking about HarmonQuest. HarmonQuest was a live-action animated hybrid series using tabletop role-playing games like Dungeons and Dragons, and it starred Dan Harmon, Spencer Crittendon, Erin McCarthy, Jeff Davis, and a rotating cast of guest stars, primarily comedians and actors. The series originally aired on SeeSo, a short-run streaming service owned by Comcast and NBC, and then it moved over to VRV or Verve, I don't know exactly how you're supposed to pronounce it, for seasons 2 and 3, and then now it's currently living on Crunchyroll. We'll start with some questions for Luke. I honestly don't even know if I know this full story, so how did you get your start in entertainment, not just animation, but just entertainment in general?
Well, way back in high school, I took a TV production class. I was super into skateboarding and snowboarding, and a big part of both of those subcultures is making videos. And so my friends and I would go out with um, little handy cams and record, and I wanted a place to edit them. And so I took a TV production class, and while I was there, I realized how much fun it was to make motion picture stuff. It's like it was like a puzzle, right? So you have picture, sound, and story, and you're adjusting all of those elements to create this greater whole. There's not really a right way or a wrong way to put something together. It's kind of an infinite amount of possibilities, but there definitely are ways that feel better and work better, and the experience of figuring that out and being able to find those moments and then make a piece that after you'd done the work became this new thing and greater than the parts of it was just really fun. I loved doing it. It tickled like a an intellectual and craft and creative part of my brain that I just hadn't really experienced anywhere else. So because of that, I decided to cinema, study filmmaking. So I went to San Francisco State. I just edited everything I could. I would work on friends' projects. I would do my projects. I interned for a documentary editor, and that was like my first real credit. His name was Bob Sarles, or his name is Bob Sarles. He's still with us. um, and yeah, he did a lot of stuff for like the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and the EMP in Seattle. And he worked for MTV on one of the first seasons of The Real World and a bunch of reality stuff. But his heart really lived in like music related documentaries. When I graduated, I moved to LA. He hooked me up with some of the other people who had interned for him, and some of the people that he'd worked with on the reality shows, and those kind of became my first credits in LA. I knew I wanted to work in post production pretty early on. I did a bunch of different work when I moved to LA. Like a lot of people, I did a bunch of background work. I did some audience work, which is even worse than background work. Um, I did some like grip and electric stuff, and that was really, really hard work. And I had, after those days working on set, I was just completely wiped. I had no extra creative energy. But when days that I worked on, when I did editing, not always, but for the most part, I would still have energy when I got home. So it didn't take long to realize that, like, yes, I really do want to focus in the post-production field. So I really, kind of laser focused my efforts to trying to get work in that part of the filmmaking process.
Yeah. Nice. Yeah. That's actually, I have a couple similarities there with kind of like getting an early bug in high school. There was a film studies class that we took, and we just were studying films, but also making our own, and we got to shoot and come up with ideas and play with it. Literally just an iMovie, but it was just like, oh, this is so cool. You get to like move the things around and
Yeah.
decide when you're cutting and all that kind of stuff. So that was kind of what my early bug too. And then I also kind of feel you on the set work, being like, this is hard work. I don't have a lot of energy for this kind of stuff,
Yeah.
and kind of being like, oh, well, there's this path that I can have a little bit more physical energy, and using your brain more. And but also there was this like, oh, there's so much that I can keep learning as I'm doing this work, all now being on computers, kind of really allowed for like, well, there's a basic way you can do stuff, but then there's all these smarter people that have done it before that are like, actually, here's a much faster way you can do it. And that kind of has always and still stimulates my brain in this field. Let's talk about animation. How'd you get your first animation gig?
So I really kind of fell into animation editing. I applied for a job as an assistant editor to a Craigslist ad, one of the only jobs I've ever gotten from a public posting. And I worked for this really super duper low budget horror film company called Taurus Entertainment. And I was their assistant editor and post production supervisor, which I actually did do. I probably wasn't really qualified for it at the beginning, but I still did it. Through that process, I would go to the post production facility and I would supervise the onlines. And through that process, the salespeople and the other people working at the post facility realized that I actually understood Final Cut Pro and I understood the software well. And they, at several years later, they needed someone to come in and do the online editorial work on Final Cut, and they thought of me because they knew I understood the program. And they kept calling me for work, and I kept doing it. And I described the process as like that feeling of when you're running downhill and you feel like you're gonna lose your balance at any point and just go tumbling and like break a limb. That's what like every day at work felt like for like, I don't know, 8 months or something, because I was doing stuff often for the first time and with clients that are paying,
Mm-hmm.
$200 an hour for the room or whatever. So there wasn't a lot of room for mistakes, but I
Mm-hmm.
did well enough that eventually they offered me a staff job and I started working at the facility. And so I would get assigned clients. And one of the clients that they had was an animation company called Sabella Dern. And they just assigned it to me. They're like, you're working with Davis Doy, this director, and you're working on Care Bears. And I'm like, I don't know anything about animation editing. And they're like, it's easy. You'll figure it out. And I was like, okay. I think the first thing I probably said was like, how do you edit animation? Isn't it already done? And the other editor who was there, who was a big mentor for me and supporter, who I believe you know, Josh,
Mm-hmm.
Bruce Cathcart. So
Yep.
Bruce really helped me and guided me both in like the technical aspects of the job, but also the creative aspects of animation editing and how you did it. So I just started to do that. Bruce and I would kind of like ping pong. Some He would do some episodes, I would do some episodes, and that was how I got into editing animation. I understood the humor and the timing of kids films, and the clients liked me, so they kept coming back to me. And then when I left there, Davis reached out to me. Um, maybe a couple years after that point and asked if I wanted to edit a Land Before Time movie that he was directing. And I said yes, because I loved working with Davis and I really needed a job. So, and then from that point on, I basically worked almost exclusively in animation.
You included one of my next questions about idols or mentors, and they kind of knew Bruce would come up.
I've been very fortunate to have some wonderful mentors and advisors and people who have helped me in my editing career over the years, and that's part of why like I take special interest when I have assistants or I have post PAs or interns. Like I always try to see what they're interested in and give them tasks that will maybe be just slightly outside of their skill level, but as a way of building their confidence, building their portfolio, and building their skill set. You know, I had Gary Sims, my TV production teacher, Bob Sarles, the guy I interned for, and then in LA it would be Bruce Cathcart and AJ Ullman both worked at that post facility.
Mm-hmm.
So AJ was the sales guy,
Mm-hmm.
and then Bruce was another editor. And then through that I met Davis Doy, the director, and Davis is still to this day probably my favorite director that I've worked for.
Nice.
Um, no offense to all the other great directors I've worked with, but Davis is just uh, so incredibly talented and just a paragon of leadership and creativity. Like he's super collaborative. He listens to people's ideas, but yet he still has the thing that he wants to do, and a great listener, and just really makes you feel like you're part of the team and respected. And watching him deal with the clients was like a master class in uh, client relations,
Yeah.
because that is a big part of the job,
Yeah. It's a huge part of the
and
job.
it is something that really can mean success in your career or not. Is just how you interact with the clients, especially when maybe they're asking for something that you know is not a good idea.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really good point because that's one of the things that I've always felt. So much of this job is stuff that you learn while you're doing it, and not just like how do you press the buttons on the on Avid or whatever. And running a room or dealing with clients and stuff like that is one of those learned things that you really can't teach in like a classroom setting. And so I've always found that like, especially as a young editor or assistant editor or someone who's has access to being in the room during sessions and watching the people who are running the room, the editors and the directors, kind of interact with either each other or their higher up creative people or any outside clients. It kind of really helps the understanding of just like, all right, how do you do the thing they're asking you to do on the computer, but also be, you know, collaborative and kind and forceful if you need to, and you know, how do you navigate those emotions and those the psychology of all that.
Mm-hmm.
It's like really interesting. And yeah, on your point of taking people under your wing and kind of seeing what their interest is, I know firsthand because I remember we had Stephanie, our post PA, who was you know, you knew from Land Before Time, right?
Yeah.
And she wasn't really that interested in editing, but you've kind of saw quickly how organized she was and stuff like that, and helping us track retakes and all that kind of stuff, which we can get into later when we're talking about HarmonQuest. But fun to hear you say that about like Bruce and some of your mentors doing that, and I saw you do that to me and some of our coworkers, and then I've also kind of, you know, tried to do that in when I've been in the seat and stuff. So it's fun to kind of see how uh that sentiment kind of pays itself forward.
Yeah, absolutely.
Do you have any like kind of favorite projects, animated projects that you've worked on or that you're most proud of?
Man, there's been a lot that I've really liked, and for different reasons. I liked Land Before Time a lot. Probably mostly for the experience of working with Davis. It's a fun movie. It's a kids movie, but really it was just like getting to do the whole process from the very start of the animatic to delivering the finished film was a great learning experience for me. I really liked Hot Wheels City, the stop motion animation thing I worked on. It had some of like the worst like physical working conditions that I've ever experienced. Going from like a studio that was like 40 degrees and you're like bundled up with like hat and scarf and jacket and space heater to the summertime where it's like, 90+% humidity and almost 100 degrees in the edit bay. You're just like dripping sweat and afraid that the computer's going to overheat at any moment. But the crew was super fun and the project was super fun, so that kind of like balanced out like the really horrible working conditions.
Yeah.
And I mean that just in like a physical sense. Like
Right. Yeah.
everybody's attitude and how we were treated was great, but it was not a nice air conditioned suite, like we're used to. And then I'm really proud of the work that we did on Invincible, and feel like I really pushed myself creatively on that, as far as like what I was able to do with retiming shots and recomposing shots. And the animation in it was so bad that there
Mm.
was a lot of room for improvement. And because we had a very tight schedule, it allowed me to do a lot more than I probably would have. Yeah, so I'm happy with that, and proud of that.
It's such a unique kind of show in that you'd expect a comic book kind of show to be just like pure action and stuff, but that show's got so much family drama embedded in it and all that kind of stuff in it, and there's a lot of like really serious moments and stuff like that, and I do kind of feel like it does make a lot of sense to kind of lock in a sense, and kind of not kind of just have that kind of show be like, all right, well, this is another show and just kind of action 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 blah blah blah
Yeah.
explosion, like it's a different kind of show than that. So
I think I
um
probably spent more time retiming the dramatic moments than
mm,
the action moments.
yeah.
Because with the action moments, it's a lot of like, just like, oh, like this needs to happen quicker,
Mhm.
or there's two extra shots here we don't need. Like, let me cut them out and see
Yeah.
if like the scene still flows, which was pretty common.
Yeah.
But with the emotional moments, I really dug into like working on the pacing on that, and like how can I make these emotional beats land harder? Like where do I need to add an additional pause? Like where do I need to, like when the character looks off, like add a hold for them thinking, that kind of like anything to make the performances feel a little bit more lifelike.
Yeah.
In general, there was a lot more poses than were necessary, but the poses weren't held long enough. And so trying to figure out which are the key poses that we need, how can I get rid of the poses we don't need, and where can I add those beats to really bring home like the awkwardness or the longing or the anger or the sadness, like all of those moments that are kind of like what you said, like make the show great. Because there's a lot of shows where like superheroes are punching each other
Yeah.
and throwing each other through buildings and stuff, but the family drama and kind of the real human emotion, I think, is, or at least was, part of what made Invincible a really fun show.
Yeah. I'm glad you brought up the like poses and timing that stuff out, because kind of broadening out, talking about how animation editing is kind of was a lot of us fell into it without having any kind of like formal training or any kind of exposure to it. A lot of editors don't really off the top under kind of know or understand what kind of editing we do in animation, and so bringing up the fact that like, yeah, there's some poses that I wanted to hold on for dramatic effect, and that's the kind of stuff that like you can do in animation, literally just like copy a frame or freeze on a frame and extend it by half or extend it by two or three times, and have that actually be something that is okay and can play in context. It doesn't look like you just like press pause on a thing, which it would in live action. Is one of the like almost like secret tips that we kind of like come across, and they're very common in animation. So I'm glad you brought that up. That's one thing for adding pauses, which of course, like in live action you can add a pause, but you have to cut away or whatever, but there's obviously ways you can do that, but making the editorial choices to inform what the emotion of a scene's supposed to be, it's the same concept. There's just like slightly different things that you can do in animation versus live action that can accomplish the same thing. I remember when I started on Frog and Toad, they told me uh feel free to hang on stuff, feel free to hang on moments, and this was kind of like for not for drama, but for kind of like awkward pauses or
Mhm.
comedy or whatever. And that was one show that I did that a lot. Sometimes like added 12 frames or added 18 frames to a pose just to kind of like let let a moment sit before cutting the tension for a funny moment or something like that. So yeah, it's one of those things that kind of like you can almost free yourself from the constraints of some live action stuff in a way, and you often don't need to worry about like, well, I can't freeze in that because the trees aren't moving in the background or whatever. So do you have any like advice, this could be quick, general advice about anyone who's looking to be an editor, an animation editor specifically, or just get into filmmaking?
The not super helpful, but probably the most realistic advice is to just do it. You need to be making stuff, whether you're making it for yourself or you're working for a YouTube creator or you're working for a film student, like whatever it is, you kind of just need to be doing it. And I wouldn't expect to get a full-time salary right away. I would keep your day job, do it on nights and weekends, build up your portfolio, build up your skill set. Often the people who are on your same experience level are the people that you're going to work with throughout your career. So build and maintain those relationships because they are most likely the people that will be calling you for work. The YouTube creator that you help for a super low price when they get their show on Netflix or Crunchyroll because their YouTube blew up, like you're going to be the one that they think of because you're the one who they can count on and whose work they trust.
Yeah, this might tie into the next question, but what are your outside hobbies outside of editing and filmmaking and all that kind of stuff?
So I have gotten into gardening a bunch, and so we have a pretty big vegetable garden.
Nice.
Uh, Woodworking, I've really enjoyed like home projects. I recently built a library for us, so
Nice.
custom bookshelves and
Floor to
cabinets.
ceiling bookshelves.
Yep.
Nice.
Well, the cabinets, there's base
Mm,
cabinets, and then
mm.
on top of those, the
Cool.
bookshelves go to the ceiling.
Nice.
And then I have my YouTube show that I do called The Good, the Bad, and the Poorly Written, where it started with me rewriting my first feature script that I wrote back when
Mm-hmm.
I was 23, which was a very, very bad neo noir about a ski bum living in South Lake Tahoe who attempts to investigate a crime. That's part of the intro.
Mm-hmm.
It was kind of one of those like my life but cooler scripts, and it needed a lot of work. So I've been going through that. And recently I've started to do film reviews too. So I'll watch new movies and kind of critique them based on how their story is working and how their script works.
Nice.
I want to do like a video about The Princess Bride. I want to
Mm-hmm.
do a video about action blocks. Like I have a bunch of other ideas for future videos that are not a like 30 part serialized exploration of a writing project. So I'm
Nice.
looking forward to finishing that initial like inspiration and moving on, seeing where the channel can go from there.
Nice. All right. Well, yeah, that's great. I think we're ready to start talking about the HarmonQuest. I know Will's been here sitting quietly listening the whole time, but yeah, do you want to take over, Will, and start asking us some questions?
Sure. No, this has all been phenomenal, and I really do appreciate it. Thinking back just as a fan, HarmonQuest, Harmontown was at such an interesting time. Yeah, we're looking at 10 plus years ago now. My experience, just as a fan, was going to Harmontown, the live show here in Los Angeles at the Nerd Melt Comic Book Shop Theater. And now, again, of course, for those who don't know, Dan Harmon, of course, is the creator of Community and Rick and Morty. And just as a sort of venting session, he would just get up on stage behind this comic book shop and rant. And this was before it was a podcast. He would just rant, and people would just hang out and go drinking afterward, and that was that. Then eventually, like, we could record this. It was an audio podcast, and I don't know if they ever really did video. Um, until it became, a kind of adult documentary series. But then he just yells out in the audience, "Hey, I want to do some D&D. Is there anyone know a dungeon master?" Spencer Crittenden happens to be in the audience. He raises his hand. Yes, I know how to DM. And they come up and they start doing D&D sessions. That becomes kind of the last act of what was at that point a long-running podcast. And so that kind of developed. They took the show on the road, and as far as my, again, audience understanding is, turned it into this show. And so they had a live taping where they said, we're going to do the D&D show, we're going to have people in a studio audience, and then we're going to turn that hour-long session to half-hour episodes. And again, my understanding as an audience is, I went to the show. I enjoyed. I listened to a session. I think maybe they had Aubrey Plaza there. It was a great show. And then later I just kind of watched it as a fan, as it was on, yes, SeeSo and then Verve. But it was a strange time for streaming and podcasting. Obviously now we've got so many D&D live shows on Twitch and otherwise. It feels a little bit almost ahead of its time. Spencer was your yes, audience surrogate. It kind of really focused on Spencer. Like, who is this guy that we plucked out of the audience, that we have launched into stardom, and as I understand it, he kind of became the showrunner of the animated series. So y'all can pick up and correct me where I'm wrong in terms of the chronology and all this. This is just kind of me as a casual observer. What was the actual behind the scenes? What was the workflow like? What was it like for you? How'd you get involved?
So Aubrey, real quick,
She was.
I want to tell a story about that. That was probably before editing the worst episode in season one. She
I
was
can concur.
she was a horrible guest.
Yes, she was so stubborn.
Yeah, well, so like it was interesting because there's the improv theory of yes
Yeah, and
and
she was no,
she was
no.
but no. She
Mm-hmm.
did but no's.
Mm-hmm.
And so she just kept shutting people down again and again, and it was really hard to go. But after editing, it became one of my favorite episodes of the season because I was able to cut out so many of those moments where she was doing that. And then the ones that I kept then became funny because it wasn't the entire episode of her just saying no and not wanting to do the improv that was the basis of the show. And it became more of just like her character being stubborn. But the way that I got onto the show was the company that it was made at, Starburns, was a partnership between Dan, Joe Russo, and James Fino. Way back when I worked at Taurus Entertainment, that first project that I got off of Craigslist, we were in a Hollywood production center, and one of the companies next to us was called 23D Films. That was Joe and James's company before Starburns. So I've known them for almost my entire career in Los Angeles and kept in contact with them. And maybe 2 years, a year and a half before HarmonQuest started, they were doing a episode of Community for Dan. So Dan had pitched a GI Joe episode of Community, which was titled GI Jeff, and they had editor working for them, Garrett Elkins, who was cutting Anomalisa at the time. And for some crazy reason, they thought he could do this episode of primetime TV and this feature film at the same time. But at some point, he was like, no, I can't. You need to bring someone else in. And so they reached out to me and I was available. And so I went and worked for, I don't know, 3 weeks or something. I worked one of the longest days of my career, 10 a.m. to I think 3 a.m.
Mm-hmm.
But that was a fun project and my first time working with Dan, and he liked me. We got along just fine. And so when HarmonQuest was coming, because I'd worked with him and because James and Joe knew me really well, they reached out to me and wanted to know if I would work on HarmonQuest. And I said, yes, I would love to work on it because it sounded like an awesome idea. And I liked working with Dan and I liked them. So that's how I got brought onto the project.
And yeah, I got brought on halfway through. It was basically there was another assistant editor working with Luke for the animatics portion of the first season, and he got another opportunity to go work on the feature, and so they needed to bring in another assistant editor to kind of take over for him. It just happened to be around the same time when the animation was first coming back from the studio, so it was kind of like a natural break in the editorial process where you're kind of done with animatics, and then you start getting your animation back in, and it's kind of a similar but different process. So I was they interviewed me and brought me in to kind of take over for that assistant, and so I missed most of the like long sessions with Dan and Spencer and stuff, and was only kind of around for the animation portion of it. I think I just got in because I think two people maybe recommended my resume to the David in the team, and that was kind of like, oh well, two people are recommending this guy, let's bring him in.
And you didn't bomb the interview, so.
Yeah.
So Luke, so you were there kind of start to finish from live action animatic final picture?
Uh-huh. Yep.
Phenomenal. And yes, what was that like?
So HarmonQuest was definitely a unique show because it was, like you said, based on the live recording of an event. So we had the different characters on different mics, but there was still bleed through between the mics, and Dan was very opposed to doing any ADR, even if it was something that they
Mm.
actually said and you just wanted it like clean without someone else talking over them or without somebody laughing or whatever. He wouldn't do it. He only wanted to use the actual live audio from the record. So with those constraints, we had to take that hour long, sometimes longer than an hour show and cut it down. So there was a lot of like figuring out, what the central through line story was and where you could safely remove bits and, is there a tangent that goes like this and then Spencer brings it back here? Well, maybe you can just go and like connect those two like that as a way of like shortening stuff. So unless it's a live comedy D&D, so there are a lot of tangents, and Spencer had like the rough like storyline blocked out. He knew where the characters needed to start and end, and how they got in between those was a lot of improv, but he would definitely like kind of guide the session to the kind of fit in with at least close to the greater story arc, similar to like how Curb Your Enthusiasm or something is made, where it's improv, but they still have like a rough outline of what needs to happen. So figuring out where to cut out those blocks, like, is it a hilarious tangent or is it like a mediocre tangent? It's a hilarious tangent. Let's try to include it. If it's mediocre, like it's gone. Like I'm not even going to play it for Dan and Spencer. Like I'm just cutting it out. I think I would try to get my first cut down to like 30 minutes or below 30 minutes so that we only had a couple minutes to cut out like with everyone. So I did the majority of the editorial work just on my own. And the real fun part of it was playing with when you're in live action and when you're in animation, because you have the character or you have the players, right? You have Dan and Spencer and Erin, like they're actual real people, right? And then you have the characters that they're playing. So you have the players and the characters, right? And so sometimes we would be in live action when they were performing as the characters. And then sometimes we would have animation where they were talking as the players. So there was this like fourth wall and I don't know, like a fifth wall that you could break, because sometimes you would that decision to like, do we cut back to live action or do we stay in animation and then have them like with their swords and their loincloths and the head of their enemy like asking the
Oh
DM
wait.
like if they can do this, if this is allowed, or do we have them like in live action like doing whatever sort of funny pantomime as they're getting into the role of their characters. So going back and forth between those was a great way to introduce more comedy and to like add some comedic effect to how you were putting together that mix of live action and animation.
I feel like also it allowed for the role of Spencer as the DM to be an animated character in the animated world, and he would just kind of like pop in like a ghost or like a floating head or whatever, to kind of like, in those moments where they were like, wait, am I allowed to do this kind of thing, he would kind of
Yeah.
pop on and off and interact with that. And I think that was some of the areas where the animation directors and the board artists kind of really got to add to the comedy, and just kind of have him, doing maybe either pop up in a funny place or doing something funny or whatever with the character. And
Yeah, so our radio play that we sent to the board artists would have the live action cut, and then in the spots that we wanted the animation to be, there would just be like a title card that said like animation here or something.
yeah,
So it was very clear like how they would integrate in like what sections they needed to draw boards for and what sections were to be left alone.
yeah, now might be a good time to shout out Dominic, or the director.
How big was the team, and kind of what was the team like? I assume you had local board artists, and then of course sent it overseas. I'm assuming Korea for animation. How many artists do you think would be per episode, or kind of for the series as a whole?
I don't know how big the board teams were in
Maybe 10 people on
yeah, yeah.
boards total. Yeah.
What Yeah, so it was a relatively small team, and then editorially it was Luke, an assistant editor, and a PA, and then we had our producer David, and creatively we had Dan and Spencer as kind of a tandem. And then season two, Dan kind of just stepped away and let Spencer do the whole creative kind of show running of it. Dan kind of was just there as the playing the part in the show, and then there as support. But he kind of really let Spencer take the reins in season two.
Season one had some real problems with the animation. They were using a South American studio,
Hmm.
which it turns out was not actually a real studio. It was kind of just a collective that farmed out to a bunch of freelancers. I even had a one of the artists at Starburns like privately told me that the company had actually reached out to them to be an animator on the show, but it was supposed to be it was supposed to have been done all at this studio in South America, but it didn't actually. I don't think it actually really existed, or if it did, it was very understaffed. We were able to pull the show and give our last two episodes to Bardell, who was doing Rick and Morty in British Columbia, and they did a phenomenal job. But the other episodes had serious, serious problems with animation, and I Dominic left to work on Rick and Morty, so I basically handled all of post. I did all of the retakes, addressed all of the studio notes,
Good lord.
attended mixes, and gave notes on the rough animation. And there was one note. One of the characters lost an amulet. Erin's character lost her amulet partway through, and I don't know if they were never shipped a model of her without the amulet, but they kept including it after that. And I must have given the note 300 or 400 times because it was like every single time. And I would say, like, she should not have the amulet until like episode 10 or whatever it was. But they just kept doing it. And so that's kind of emblematic of like however they were distributing notes and character models, they were not giving that information to other people.
Mm.
But I think we had 9 in-house animators that we
Yeah,
brought in
it
for the
built up over
retakes.
time. It was good start. It was before we knew how bad the animation was gonna be. It was gonna be like one or two, and then we just like had to keep adding in-house people.
Yeah. And we were like working weekends, and it was crazy because we couldn't get the animation studio to do the retakes. And so we needed to basically we did all of the retakes in house. So all the technical, all the creative retakes, any we didn't have a lot of like network notes, but we had a few. And we had notes from Dan and Spencer, and then just stuff that I saw and that David, our producer, saw. And yeah, we had just a machine going, and that's where Steph really like stepped up and really did a great job organizing because we had so many shots that needed to be redone and assets, and who do you assign the shots to, and which ones can I just leave a written note on, and which ones do the animators need to come and talk to me so I can like explain the note to them. It was a wild, wild time, but we got it all done.
Yeah,
And hopefully, season two was not as much of a cluster because that was insane
yeah,
the amount of work we had to do to fix that show.
yeah. Season two, I think we just used Bardell the whole time, and yeah, they were a lot better. And so we didn't have as many issues and stuff. Because season two, the kind of like my role kind of shifted from season one to season two. Like I said earlier, I came on as an assistant for Luke for basically the animation, the picture editing process. So I was helping. We would get retakes in. I would cut them into the project and hand them over to him, and that's when he would kind of go over them and do his feedback. And so season two, he left to go work on another project, and they hired another editor for the live action animatic um, portion. This guy Robert, he left before the animation came in, and then I was promoted to picture editor. I kind of took over what Luke was doing at that stage and reviewing retakes and again, it was the workload wasn't as bad because the animation was much better. Um, and I think second season Dominic was still around to kind of help do retake directing. It's funny because this was my second animation job, and my previous job had the same thing where the director left before animation came in, and kind of like as a collective editorial unit, our job became retake directing in addition to editing. And so like I, almost didn't realize this wasn't the norm until I got to my third show. But editors aren't really supposed to also be doing the retake directing, and yes, this is kind of like the symptom of lower budgets and lower staffing. And I do always sometimes notice and laugh to myself at the idea that like no matter what show you're on, you're with people that have done this before, have worked in animation before, know how to build a show, but yet inevitably there's always stuff of like, all right, how do we do this? How are we gonna build this pipeline? How are we gonna like make this show? Yeah, like Lou said, like having a post PA who ended up being a pretty strong coordinator, kind of like put really kind of quickly put together using help from templates and stuff like that, like a way of tracking all these retakes that we could, so we would be able to, I would mark this shot is cut in, and then Luke would have a spot in the spreadsheet to kind of add his notes. And it was kind of like, despite how chaotic it may sound, like we were able to kind of organize the chaos into a way that was that worked for the pipeline.
Yeah, it definitely wasn't. It wasn't crazy from like we don't know where these files are, or we don't know how we're proceeding. It was just it was the volume of work. But that's because we had a great team, and we really thought about the workflow and thought about the tracking, and everybody knew their job and did it well.
That's so wild to hear that. Like, yes, I'm so, for those who don't know, retakes generally are like, yes, if you have make a mistake in house or something where we told you the wrong thing or the timing sheet was wrong, the studio's going to eat the cost. But if the overseas vendor makes a mistake, then they have to eat the cost. And this sounds like a case where, yes, our low budget ends up costing us in the end. I think that happens all too often.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a shame because, there's so many hungry domestic animators, college grads that would love to be able to do good old classic character animation like we used to have here. And now it's like, oh, we're going to outsource everything. And of course, have to translate all of our notes and coordinate all of this and then get it back and try again. It's just like, God, I just, yes, wish we had more of a domestic foundation for animators.
Yeah.
Sorry,
Yep.
not to be a little political rant there, but I'm just like, my God, the amount of work being done just to not put good old animators to work here in Burbank.
Yeah.
Yep. Agree.
If you could, in some way, yes, compare some of this to other projects you worked on since, do you feel as though has it feel looking back? You're like, well, what a debacle, or you know what, I get it.
I mean, I look back on it fondly. Because from a career kind of milestone standpoint, that's the show that I got bumped back up to being an editor. Because when I switched into animation, I bumped back down to assistant editors to kind of learn the pipeline and kind of relearn a whole new system. Um, so it's my first animation editor credit. So I look fondly with that. I obviously got to meet Luke and Stephanie and the crew that we worked with. David, our producer, was one of those producers that just for me personally, like really liked working with me and kept me around at Starburns for a while post HarmonQuest. Between when season one ended, they weren't entirely greenlit for season two, and we were working on a pilot that Luke had been editing, And when HarmonQuest was done, Luke left, and the pilot was still unfinished. So they asked me to kind of finish editing the pilot. And so I got to work with, yeah, that was kind of a crash course. And no, that's the first time I got to edit animatics for a couple little sequences. And this was a project that involved Albert Brooks, and I got to do a session with him, which was a kind of like, oh my good, kind of wow moment. And that kind of allowed me to stay at the company for when season two did get picked up. And then so I was on board for the beginning, and I got to use some of the knowledge in ingesting. It was all shot on XD-Cam and stuff, and I knew how to ingest all that from my reality days. So I was like, all right, let's go, let's do it. And I got to do the whole multicam assist, building out an Avid and stuff, and do all that prep work, um, and got to attend some of the season two tapings and stuff. So kind of my season two kind of got to witness the whole operation. And because it was a new editor, he kind of often was, oh, how would we do things in season one? Kind of asking that stuff because I was the representative. Because Stephanie, our PA, also left after season one, and we brought in a different PA. So I was kind of, me and the producer were really the only production people that were like here for, or post people that were here for both seasons. And I learned a lot. I learned a lot from Luke. The whole retake, reviewing retakes for stuff. I know some of the first kind of, like he was saying earlier, identifying things and giving tasks and jobs to his assistants, and kind of helping critique. One of the first couple things that he had me do when his cutting and retakes would be like, all right, why don't you take a pass and see if there's something you can see in these retakes that might be wrong. And a lot of it was looking for continuity errors and what's called hookups. So if a character's arm is up in one shot and then you cut to the next shot and his arm is down, that's a hookup issue. Um, so that kind of stuff. And so I would kind of put little markers on my timeline and hand it over to him, and then he'd come back to me with like, oh, you caught these and things, but there's one more thing. Did you catch? Did you notice this? And then we talk about that. And then also, this was a show that was episodic, and each episode tied into the plot of the previous episode. So we decided that we needed to do like recaps of what happened in the previous episode, and that was something that I had done as an assistant editor, cutting in reality TV all the time. And so I kind of was like, hey, I know how to do this. I've done this in reality TV. And I remember my first couple passes, Luke being like, I got like one note, maybe. Like, I remember being pretty like, oh wow, I think I like, this training that I had, because I kind of like really like boot camped it in some of the editors that I worked with in reality TV. So it was just kind of like a style of editing that I knew how to do pretty seamlessly. So I was kind of look back to being like oh yeah, that's you kind of look back in your career, you see like moments of like, oh yeah, no, I'm on the right path.
I had you do the intros too, the
Yeah.
little explainers, because each at the beginning of each episode, Spencer would explain like how the format of the show and how D&D works, and he did it a little bit different in each one. So we had stuff from the art department, which were all these like pieces that
Yes.
explained, kind of went along with his explanations, and then Josh would do a version of the explainer. I think maybe I did the first one,
Yeah, I was a good
and
tip. I
then
totally forgot about this too.
yeah,
This is
and then
like
I
After
had you
Effects motion graphics kind of stuff.
yeah, and then I had you do the other ones, and I would give, we usually only did, I feel like we only did like one round of notes. Like
Mm.
there was minimal tweaks on the first ones, and then probably almost none on the later ones.
Yeah. And
And I don't think Spencer ever had notes on those. I think he liked like what we were doing on
yeah,
them.
yeah. I
Um,
now thinking about that, I remember starting to be like, once I started doing them, and once you kind of like stopped having feedback, I kind of like became my own critic, and like I would do it like, no, and that's again another like, oh yeah, you're kind of like catching yourself and coaching yourself and critiquing yourself to kind of like improve the final product.
and
Uh,
that's one thing that's important as an editor, is to know what your client wants
yeah.
and be able to anticipate that. And so in this case, like I was the client for Josh, so he paid attention to the sorts of notes that I gave, and then was able to do those notes on his own before I even gave them, and thus not get any notes from me. But those are like the sorts of things where, talking about like small tasks that you can give to an assistant or give to a post PA,
Yeah.
depending on, if you're on a union or non-union project, of
Right. Yeah.
course. But like those are the sorts of things that you are able to do and to give to someone, and then they're able to go through the whole process of like feedback and revisions, and you get to see how they handle notes, and you get to see like, is this a person who's worth like investing time to help build up the career? Because part of that is, the way I look at it is like, I am both training them and testing them, and my job as an editor with an assistant is to both train them but also see if they are able to be an editor. Like, can they step up to the next role? So when I left the project and David called me and was like, we got extended for cops, like, do you want to keep working on it? And I was like, no, hire Josh, because I knew Josh could do it, and I knew that he worked well with clients, like he worked well with notes, and he got along with Robert, our director on the pilot.
Mhm.
And so I knew it would be a good fit, and I had confidence that he could do it, and it seemed like a good step for him because it was a project that was already going with a team that he already knew. And I don't want to say like, you want to set people up for success,
Yeah.
right? Like, you don't want to give someone an opportunity that they're not going to succeed at, because you're not doing them a service at that, because that can be really detrimental both for their like emotional state and ego, but also for their career. But through our course on HarmonQuest, Josh had demonstrated that he had the technical abilities and the personality or personnel relations, that I knew that that was like a good next step for him. And I was confident in like passing that project along to him. So
Yeah.
just just kind of hammering in the parts of like how important like mentorship is, and how important like um, thinking about your team and helping those who are like not as far along in their career or have less experience than you is.
Yeah. And I think when I again, so like I kind of got like to edit a little bit after that, and then again went back to assisting for season two. But my season two editor saw a lot of the same stuff in me, and I was just like, hey, I was cutting these recaps for season one. Do you want me to do that? And he's like, yep. And he never gave me any feedback on them. Same thing with those explainer things. I think even the explainer things, I started doing what Luke was doing, and we had a post PA that was a little bit more interested in editorial stuff and knew how to work with Avid and After Effects. So I gave him some of that stuff to do. So I kind of took some of the stuff that Luke was doing for me, and then operating as kind of like a lead assist to like a second assist, like handed out over some of those tasks to the PA. Yeah, another like full circle kind of thing. Also, yeah, also shout out to Robert Marionetti. Is that it, or Mary? Yeah,
Yeah, Marionetti. Yeah.
yeah. He was one of the sweetest and most accommodating. And I think, maybe leaned on it because he knew I was so green with editing, but like it was really, I felt like I was in good hands whenever I was working and editing with him. Because even after we did that Cops project, I did another pilot with him. And, he would, often give me a lot of like, you've come a long way kind of feedback and stuff. And so, I think that kind of like trust that Luke first started building and kind of like snowballed through other people that we were working with throughout our time at Starburns. So that all kind of like really helped build me up in that early part of my, at least my animation editing career.
No, that really is sweet and inspiring to hear. I really do think it's I think all the time when I'm, building puzzles with my children, it's like they're putting together the puzzle. I'm kind of in the background, kind of getting the pieces that they're going to need ready for them. And I think it's a similar sort of experience, with an assist, where you're just gonna, let me try to mentally, yes, get in your headspace, think of what you're going to need, and oh look, it happened to be right here for you. If there's anything else you want to add, yeah, yeah.
I'm sure Luke can answer this better, but I feel like Dan Harmon is such a, I don't know kind of notorious maybe, or polarizing. I almost said harmonizing, polarizing kind of creator. I always get asked like what it was like working with him, and I personally never really interacted with him that much. Being on a project with someone who's that who's got that kind of like clout, I guess, or kind of like
Aura.
aura. Yeah, that's a good way to put it. You always get like, oh, what was it like? What was it like? So
I when I worked on the community episode with him, I definitely was nervous because I'd heard stories about him and how he was, difficult to work with and demanding, and I I didn't have that experience at all. I thought he was great to work with. He definitely has a very clear vision of what he wants for his projects, and I think to some people maybe that comes off as demanding or difficult, but it really vibed with me because it is like really caring about your craft and about the thing that you're making. And yeah, sometimes you have to spend a lot of time on a very small part of it, but it is an important thing. And one thing I really liked about working with him is he would often have big notes, like big, like we need to, redo this part, or this is completely wrong. It needs to be like this instead. But the thing about his notes is he was always right. They were always the right thing to do. Um, they always made the project better. And I have worked for other executives and directors who will have big notes that are not the right thing to do and do not make the project better. Yeah, so I really enjoyed working with him. I'd love to, I'd work with him again, like in a heartbeat.
all right, so the next segment I'm calling Freak Out or Geek Out. One of us is going to take one of us take the other. We'll talk about something that's either like freaking us out or worrying us or whatever, or something that we're really excited about. We'll go in chronology order of the title. So I'll start with the Freak Out one. I just watched the AI doc How I Became an Apocalyptimist. It's from the Academy Award winning filmmakers behind Everything Everywhere All at Once. A father to be tries to figure out what is happening with all this AI insanity. The AI doc, or How I Became an Apocalyptimist, is a handmade, eye opening documentary about the most powerful technology humanity has ever created and what's at stake if we get it wrong. So basically, we all have a lot of kind of AI anxiety or curiosity or agnosticism or whatever your stance on it is. And I have found that there's just like so much going on with it. There's so much like, is this going to take over everything? Is this going to take over our jobs? And it's been really hard and difficult to figure out what stuff to pay attention to and what stuff to be aware of and what stuff to kind of be like, well, let's see how this shakes out and then I'll pay attention, or then I'll kind of think about it. And that's the stance that this director does a documentary with. He's kind of like the main character of this documentary, and he's interviewing all these tech people that are working in AI and know a lot about it. In the midst of making this documentary, he reveals that he and his wife are expecting a baby, and one of the interviewees says that oh, if a kid was born now, I'd be surprised if they made it to high school, and that kind of like really kind of kind of like shocked and scared me. Also as someone who has kids, and that in the moment in that documentary, he kind of like the director kind of reveals his own freak out moment about that, and then he starts to ask some other people, like, we're having a baby, like, am I making a mistake having a baby right now because of all this? And at that point they kind of shift to start talking to some of these AI optimists who are like, well, yes, all this negative stuff can happen, but like this technology could cure cancers and all that kind of stuff. Like, it's all this so there's all this negative possibilities, but there's all this positive possibilities. And so what I'm still a little freaked out of by all of it, but I actually kind of the documentary does kind of help present a, like, all right, as a regular person who doesn't know the tech that well, who's just trying to exist in this world and kind of prepare for whatever I need to prepare for, like, mentally, how do I navigate it? And it kind of leave some of that up to the viewer, but there's also some resources that they're promoting about how to get involved, and I do recommend it. I know the editor on it, Daisha. I used to work with her in my reality TV days. She's had an amazing career since then and gotten Emmys and stuff. But yeah, it's on Peacock if you're a streaming person, and so if you are okay being freaked out a little bit, I'd recommend watching it. It's interesting. And yeah, Luke, you want to go for a thing you're geeking out at the moment?
Yeah, well, let's see. I already talked about my YouTube. I don't know. I'm really excited about the garden. It's always a fun time of year to start the garden and to like, you have these little tiny plants, and then in a month or so they'll be bigger, and in 2 months they'll be like fruiting out, and you'll get tomatoes, and we're gonna get a pressure canner soon, so we're gonna be like hopefully knock on wood, getting a bunch of sauce tomatoes, and we grew garlic for the first time. I did not know my first 2 times trying to grow garlic that you are supposed to plant it in the fall, not in the spring. So I planted it last October, and I probably have, I'm guessing, somewhere in the realm of 100 plus cloves of garlic right now growing, and they're looking good. They're looking like where they should be. The fronds or stalks or whatever are like, I don't know, 2 feet tall and starting to get a little dry at the tips. So I'll cut off water to them in a bit and let them dry out, and then we'll have these awesome garlic braids hanging up somewhere. Maybe they'll make our whole house smell like garlic. I don't know, but
Keep the
it's
vampires away.
yeah, it's a really fun process to. There's something really rewarding about being able to do something with your hands, and which is why I've enjoyed woodworking. Like I love editing, and I love writing and working on the computer, but at some point I just need to like get off of that and like touch grass, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like I need to be out in the physical world, in the meat space, doing things. And the garden allows for like some experimentation. I failed multiple times on the garlic and then did some research, and now I think I'm doing it right, but maybe I'll have done something wrong again. Learning new things is good, and I would encourage everyone to try to pick something that is like outside of your skill level, or slightly outside of your skill level, because that'll really I think help grow, and then also kind of exercise a part of your brain that maybe your day job or your like the craft that you're pursuing doesn't necessarily use, and that can free up some. I don't know, there's a weird thing where it's like it doesn't take up the space that like my writing or my editing takes up. It almost like helps it because it allows that part of the brain to rest. And I don't think that's necessarily scientific, but that's just like my like personal experience of it. I'd say that's what I'm currently geeking out on.
Nice. Will, do you want to take one? You can pick one or both, or
I gotta say, well, that's phenomenal. I really can't top that in terms of the gardening. That's really beautiful. As for my own hobbies, it's mostly silly figures, as you might see behind me. I just have all too many. Here's a little Gogeta, from Dragon Ball. So yeah, I mean, it's nerd stuff. That's where I'm at outside of parenting and working is
yeah.
silly pieces of plastic.
All right. Awesome. Well, thank you guys both for being here. Will, thanks for taking some of the interview load off me, and allowing me to talk about some stuff that Luke and I worked on together. Luke, thank you for being here. I always enjoy chatting, and yeah, thank you guys. Thank the audience for watching and listening, and we'll have more to come later. Thanks.
All right,
Thanks,
take
everybody.
care.